Ed stumbled across the planks of the captain's quarters, the dim light struggling through the drapes hung across the windows. The shadow of the neighbouring ship passed across the bed, blocking out the last of the sun's rays. Ed lurched down to grab his sword, trailing the blade across the floor as he poured the last of the rum from the bottle into his mouth and threw the empty glass against the wall where it shattered. The deck was chaos, the pirate hunters fighting with Ed's crew all around him as the smoke of gunpowder filled the air and the sound of clashing blades and cannons rang in his ears. It all felt like a haze to Ed, like he was walking through a dream. He smiled to himself. Maybe today would be the day somebody finally got him, and it would all be over. He'd found out Steed was dead months ago, some horribly traumatic death back in Barbados, and since then he'd stopped caring what happened to his sad, empty life. Izzy had tried to confront him about their sloppy raids, their reckless plans, but Ed had honestly just been hoping someone might finish it and he could go and join Steed on his next adventure. Without Steed, there was nothing left to live for. "Little Edward Teach," a voice rang out across the deck, cutting into Ed's brain like a scalpel. "Hornigold," he growled, fixing his eyes on the older man facing him across the ship. Hornigold was wearing a long, trailing brown coat, which billowed behind him in the wind, his sinister smile like a knife in Ed's belly. The man looked at him the way a predator looks at prey, a glint of something terrifying in his eyes. "We've been tracking you for a couple of weeks now." "I thought you'd be harder to find," Hornigold said, slowly walking towards Ed. "Maybe I wasn't trying to be careful," Ed growled in reply as he matched Hornigold's movement. The two of them met in the middle of the deck, slowly starting to circle each other. "Yeah, I had heard that you got sloppy recently," Hornigold hummed. "Heard something happened between you and your pet rich boy." Ed's brow furrowed lower. "No idea what you're talking about. Pets aren't allowed on my ship." Hornigold laughed. "Yeah, that was always one of the rules you always took seriously. Or at least, you did after you got your lashings when I found you with that kitten." "Why are you here, Hornigold?" Ed spat, anger bubbling up despite the numbing alcohol. "I'm a pirate hunter now," Hornigold said, eyes glinting. "Didn't you hear?" Now it was Ed's turn to bark out a bitter laugh. "Old Captain Hornigold, working for the Crown." "And Edward Teach, deserter of the Crown," Hornigold replied. "Surrendered his life for his sweet little boyfriend, who promptly ran away and died. Such a tragic tale for the tragic little boy I picked up on the docks." Ed felt the red mist of cold rage settle on him as Hornigold smiled the words at him. "The tragic tale was I got picked up by you," he wrenched out. "You tortured us, you made me into this, and now you're going to give me up for a few gold coins. Well, I won't go down without a fight." "That's what I was hoping you'd say," Hornigold grinned at him. The fight was not going as well as Ed had hoped. The alcohol had dulled his senses and slowed his reaction times, and Hornigold had taught him all the basics of swordplay. Sure, he had a good 20-year advantage over the older man, who was showing his own age, but Ed was barely holding his own. Ed was barely aware of anything going on around them. The world had shrunk to the man in front of him and their swords. Hornigold was still grinning, the flash of his eyes making Ed feel feral and uncontrolled. And feral and uncontrolled meant he was making mistakes, and his arms and chest were crisscrossed with shallow cuts which leaked blood down his leathers. Hornigold was toying with him, and he knew it. If it was anyone else, he would just let it happen. But with Hornigold, Ed needed to at least give him the fight he had left. He owed that to his younger, tortured self. A low rumble of laughter pulled Ed out of his memories. "You really have lost your touch, ain't you, Edward?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Ed replied, wiping his arm across his bloody mouth and spitting onto the deck. "Never thought I'd see the great Blackbeard brought to his knees," Hornigold smiled, oozing with contempt. "Let alone by someone like Steed Bonnet." "You keep his name out your mouth," Ed yelled, parrying a thrust from the older man. "So it's true," Hornigold smirked. "You really do have a thing for him." Ed glowered at the older man, rage bubbling in his chest. Steed's name deserved better than to be spoken by someone like him. You have no idea what you're talking about, old man. He lunged forward, full of anger and pain, and Hornigold laughed as he knocked his sword away and sent Ed down to the deck with a booted foot to the chest. "You've gotten sloppy, Edward," Hornigold said. "I'm disappointed. I expected more from the terror of the seas. You're just an heartbroken shadow of a man. It almost feels like a pity to kill you." Ed sat on the deck, one arm propping him up and the other squeezing his chest where the boot had made impact and winded him. Hornigold was standing over him, sword pointed forward, ready to take the killing blow. "Almost," Hornigold said, as Ed closed his eyes to welcome the release he'd been waiting for. The noise on the ship changed, suddenly. There was more shouting, clashing, and then a pained shout right in front of Ed. He opened his eyes, expecting to see the death blow from Hornigold, but instead there was a figure standing above him, back to him. There was a sword sticking through his right side. Ed shifted to look past this unknown figure and saw Hornigold grasping his own wound in his chest, blood pumping out in thick, dark spurts. Must have been an artery. "Who are you?" Hornigold gasped, looking up at the figure as he dropped to his knees. "Steed Bonnet, the gentleman pirate. No one touches my Ed," the figure replied. And Ed felt his world implode at the sound. "Impossible!" Hornigold whispered before collapsing to the deck, lifeless. Suddenly the figure above Ed was gripping at his side and falling down to his knees. Ed scrambled up and rounded the figure, desperate to see his face. He gasped, the blonde-haired, lined face of Steed looking at him. "Ed," Steed hissed, smiling. "Got here in the nick of time." You're dead," was all Ed could reply, stunned. "Ed was one hell of a fuckery," Steed chuckled, before groaning and tightening his grip on the wound in his side, blood blooming across his billowing white shirt. "Gotta tell you about it sometime." "But you were gone," Ed whispered. Steed held out a hand and cupped Ed's tear-stained cheek. "I know, I'm sorry, but I had to come and find you, Ed. I love you." Ed's chest nearly exploded at those words, but he didn't get a chance to reply as Steed's hand dropped from his face and he caught the injured man before his unconscious body hit the wooden planks of the ship's deck. It took a second for everything to sink in before Ed was screaming, "Someone help us! Someone help him!" "Ah, there you are," came a soft voice as Ed's eyes fluttered open. "Steed," he said, jolting fully awake instantly and leaning over to the man on the bed. "How long have you been awake?" "Not long," Steed said, a soft smile on his tired, pale face. "But you're so beautiful when you're sleeping, I didn't want to wake you." Ed huffed. "You got stabbed, you nut." Steed let out a small laugh and then groaned. "I did at that, didn't I? Couldn't let that bastard run you through just when I finally found you again." "I thought you were dead," Ed's voice cracked. "I was ready to join you." Steed's brow knotted. "I'm sorry, love. I thought you'd realise it was a fuckery. I didn't realise how much I'd hurt you. I can't expect you to forgive me for that." "Steed," Ed replied, voice thick, "you almost died for me. I can't not forgive you, even if I wanted to." Steed reached out a hand to cup Ed's face again. "You gave your life up for me when you signed the Act of Grace, and now you know I'd do the same for you in a heartbeat." "I love you too," Ed whispered, leaning forward to touch his forehead against Steed's. "I know," Steed replied, equally quietly. "Never doubted it for a moment." They stayed like that, foreheads touching and eyes closed, for longer than they could measure. And after that, they stayed together for the rest of their lives.